Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the first foreign leader at the White House since President Trump imposed new global tariffs. Netanyahu promises to drop trade barriers. Jack Bradley has more on that and Trump's talks with Iran. That's as protesters in Israel mark a year and a half since the October 7th attacks. Meanwhile, a Palestinian official raises new concerns about the 15 medics reportedly killed in the Gaza Strip. Jason Perry reports. Countries around the globe are reacting to the new U.S. tariffs, how different nations are responding, and what President Trump is saying about the shift in global trade. Top House Republicans plan to move forward this week on Trump's tax cuts, but some members are concerned that there are insufficient spending cuts in the Senate-approved budget blueprint. Luis Martinez on Capitol Hill. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts today temporarily delays a midnight deadline for the government to return an immigrant mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met with President Trump at the White House today. Their talks come amid Israel's ongoing war against Hamas, efforts to block Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, and new reciprocal tariffs. Our Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Stopping Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and negotiating trade amid new tariffs. These were among the discussions at the White House today in meetings with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump. Netanyahu is the first foreign leader to meet with Trump since Trump began hiking tariffs on countries around the world, including a 17% tariff on Israel. According to a top White House economic advisor, since these tariffs went into effect, over 50 countries reached out to Washington to negotiate. Netanyahu saying Israel will lead by example.
We will eliminate the trade deficit with the United States. We intend to do it very quickly. We think it's the right thing to do. And we're going to also eliminate trade barriers, a variety of trade barriers that have been put up unnecessarily. And I think Israel can serve as a model.
Trump says these tariffs could be permanent, but there may be room for negotiation.
We're going to get fair deals and good deals with every country, and if we don't, we're going to have nothing to do with them. They're not going to be allowed to participate in the United States.
As for Israel, it's unclear if after this meeting tariffs will change.
But we give Israel billions of dollars a year, billions. It's one of the highest of, and we give a lot of countries money.
The two leaders also discussed preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Trump said that he's speaking directly to the leaders of the Iranian regime, and they're meeting on Saturday.
Doing a deal would be preferable to doing the obvious. And hopefully those talks will be successful, and I think it would be in Iran's best interest if they are successful.
Trump and Netanyahu also talked strategy on freeing the remaining hostages while eliminating Hamas terrorists in Gaza.
We're looking at another ceasefire. We'll see what happens, but we want to get the hostages out. The Israeli people want the hostages out more than anything. They want the hostages out. This man is working very hard with us to do that.
Going forward, this meeting between Trump and Netanyahu could set the stage for how world leaders negotiate with Trump over tariffs. Reporting by Jack Bradley, NTD News.
It's now been a year and a half since the October 7th terrorist attacks, and dozens of hostages are still being held in the Gaza Strip. Protesters made their voices heard outside of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's home while he meets with President Trump in Washington, D.C. NTD's Jason Perry has the war update.
Residents in Israel demonstrated outside of the home of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday while he was in D.C. to meet with President Trump. The relative of a deceased hostage shared his thoughts.
Netanyahu, Trump, please, it's been a year and a half. Bring them all home now. Netanyahu, you are free to go as you please. You can travel to the United States. Our brothers are not free. Let my people go.
Just the night before, Hamas terrorists launched about 10 rockets towards Israel, most of which were intercepted, according to Israeli forces. Israeli emergency services say they treated one person for shrapnel injuries. Israel also released a video of what they said were terrorists in the West Bank throwing rocks at cars on the highway and endangering civilians. Israeli troops opened fire on them, killing one who was reportedly a U.S. citizen and injuring the two others. This comes as Israeli forces are facing international pressure after they reportedly opened fire and killed several medics in the Gaza Strip. Israel said the emergency vehicles did not have their lights on and were approaching them suspiciously, but a new video released by the Palestine Red Crescent shows otherwise. On Monday, the head of the Palestine Red Crescent asked why Israel destroyed and buried the ambulances and called for an independent investigation. He also said they had a recording that shows some of the medics were still alive when Israeli troops approached them.
They might have been injured, they might have been, but for sure, they were alive. When they were under Israeli control of the soldiers, that's a proof that they were alive. They are not anymore.
Israel's government spokesperson David Mincer on Monday said the situation is under investigation, and he added this.
There's an issue which I almost never see reported in international media, and that is the fact that it is a matter of public record that Hamas have on many occasions, many documented occasions, used ambulances as a cover.
Israel initially said 9 terrorists were killed in the incident, but according to Israeli media, they later said that it was at least 6 terrorists who were killed. Jason Perry, NTD News.
A Ukrainian delegation is set to visit the U.S. this week. That's to move forward with the negotiations for a minerals deal. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister announced this week's meetings on X today. She says the goal is to align on project selection, legal frameworks, and long-term investment mechanisms. President Trump wants to use Ukraine's rare earth minerals as a financial guarantee for the money the U.S. is sending. Negotiations halted after Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky got into a disagreement during a meeting in D.C. After the talks, Trump and Zelensky both agreed to meet again. Countries around the globe are reacting to the new tariffs recently announced by President Trump. The European Union is reportedly planning to impose countermeasures, which Mexico is trying to avoid. Here's the latest on the shift in global trade.
We have a deficit with the European Union of $350 billion.
President Trump on Monday explaining why the U.S. is imposing new tariffs on the European Union. Trump doubled down on previous assertions, saying European countries shouldn't rely on the U.S. for military defense.
We were paying for NATO, so we're paying them to guard them militarily, and they're screwing us on trade. So that's not a good combination.
Trump's tariffs on the European Union affect mostly steel and aluminum. The European Commission now reportedly proposes counter-tariffs of 25% on a range of U.S. goods. That's according to a document seen by Reuters. The goods include diamonds, eggs, dental floss, and more. EU member states are due to vote on this proposal on Wednesday. Meanwhile, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has been tasked with starting tariff negotiations with Japan. Similar to the EU, the relationship with Japan, Trump says, is not balanced at the moment.
You're going to have to open up your country because we sold no cars, like 0 cars in Japan, and they sold millions of cars into our country. They don't really take our agriculture, a little bit of it, just to keep us slightly happy.
Secretary Bessent is criticizing China's response to the new U.S. tariffs, saying China has chosen to isolate itself by retaliating and doubling down on previous negative behavior. Canada's Prime Minister says he thinks the U.S. will head towards a recession once the tariffs are implemented.
So the U.S. is driving itself into a recession, pressure on the world if the U.S. doesn't change course.
The Prime Minister added that he spoke with the Bank of Canada and the country's finance minister to prepare for possible consequences of the shift in global trade. Mexico, meanwhile, trying to strike a balance with the newly announced trade rules.
We would like to avoid imposing reciprocal tariffs. I'll tell you why. Cars have their own characteristic, but particularly on steel and aluminum. The increase of 25% would raise prices in Mexico.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum added that the country will continue negotiations with U.S. officials.
The House of Representatives this week will consider the Senate-approved budget resolution, but some fiscal hawks have already said they won't support it because of insufficient spending cuts, and House Speaker Mike Johnson can't afford to lose more than 3 votes on a party-line vote. Our Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on the story.
It's a brutal Republican pincer move. Donald Trump's raised costs on the one side, and Senate Republicans are cutting Medicaid and pushing billionaire tax breaks on the other.
Lawmakers are pushing back against President Trump's so-called big, beautiful bill, the reconciliation bill the Republican lawmakers are drafting to push through President Trump's legislative agenda.
Ranking Member Meeks, a Democrat, has moved forward with a discharge petition, a procedural effort to put that bill on the floor. How far will they go on the Republican side to be loyal to Trump over loyalty to country, the economy, and their own constituents?
Democratic lawmakers are pushing to strip President Trump's powers to levy tariffs on other countries without congressional approval. A similar effort is underway in the Senate.
If we continue to see the stock market go a certain direction, or if we see inflation or unemployment shift in a bad way, I think then this bill becomes a very viable bill. So it will not pass tomorrow or maybe in the next couple of weeks, but this will be in the queue that we can use.
President Trump has already said he would veto such a bill, and the majority of House Republican lawmakers have voiced their support for President Trump's tariff and tax cut plan.
So we have to pay a little bit more for American-made products or products made by our allies, and I think that's the price we're going to have to pay because China is our greatest adversary. I don't want to have my children or grandchildren living in a world dominated by the Communist Chinese Party.
A $1.2 trillion trade deficit in 2024. I don't think that's fair to our country. I think the American people understand that, and I think they see a president who's engaging and trying to fix that. So we're going to give him the space necessary to do it, and we'll see how it all develops.
So I think if you combine that with tax policy of making these tax cuts permanent for working folks, you combine that with energy dominance, you combine that with regulatory reform, you can combine that with not paying illegal immigrants taxpayer dollars, with a fair trade policy, we're going to have prosperity in this country.
House Republican leadership is expected to put the Senate-approved budget resolution to a vote on the House floor this week. The Senate-approved budget resolution calls for $4 billion in spending cuts, but House Republican spending hawks are looking for $1.5 trillion in spending cuts. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
The Supreme Court today blocked a Maryland judge's midnight deadline to return an illegal immigrant who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador.
Chief Justice John Roberts on Monday granted an emergency appeal from the Trump administration, which means deported Salvadoran Kilmar Abrego Garcia will remain in El Salvador's maximum security prison. The U.S. has admitted that they sent Abrego Garcia in error, but argue that he's no longer under U.S. jurisdiction. He was deported along with more than 200 Venezuelans, all believed to be associated with gangs such as Tren de Aragua and MS-13. The Department of Homeland Security says it verified that Abrego Garcia is a lead member of MS-13, an international criminal gang the U.S. has designated as a terrorist organization. President Trump authorized the deportation of the suspected gang members under the Alien Enemies Act, which allows removal without due process during a national threat. The threat typically involves a war, but can also involve an invasion or incursion. Lower courts have blocked Trump from using the act for deportations. In Abrego Garcia's case, the administration argues that the lower court's order to return him is unlawful because it requires him to be removed from foreign custody.
Coming up, Easy Pass users, this one's for you. Your location and credit card data could fall into the wrong hands. Kevin Hogan investigates a bid for the New Jersey Turnpike's tolling system, allegedly linked to communist China. And a U.S.-based dance company facing ongoing bomb threats. Police in Taiwan now trace the source of the threats to a city in northwestern China, where an institute of tech giant Huawei is located. More on the investigation after the break. On to transportation. If you use Easy Pass, listen up. A company that is set to handle the tolls on the New Jersey Turnpike might be tied to Communist China. That could spell trouble for you, given the sensitive information loaded onto your transponder. Our data reporter Kevin Hogan is looking into this. Kevin, give us a rundown of this contract and why there is so much controversy over it.
This is a very big deal dollar-wise. That's a $1.7 billion bid that's been approved for TransCore to provide the tolling services for the New Jersey Turnpike. Now, there is a protest to that bid by another company that was not too happy about how they came in a little bit lower, but yet the New Jersey Turnpike Authority went with TransCore. So we're going to look further into this and see what is at stake. Now, that is millions of New Jerseyans and maybe others who may be transiting the New Jersey Turnpike. That's their address information, credit card information, their driver's licenses and their license plates. All of that information could be susceptible to falling into the wrong hands, and that's what New Jersey Congressman Josh Gottheimer is raising the alarm about. We're going to see his quote right here. So he's saying that the Chinese Communist Party has made it abundantly clear that it is willing to leverage technology to undermine our national security and collect data on American citizens. This wouldn't be the first time if it does turn out to be the case. Think TikTok, think DeepSeek. Those are other avenues that the CCP uses to get information on Americans. Now, this company, TransCore, is a Tennessee-based company in the United States, but the problem is that its backstory is very convoluted, and it goes all the way to ST Engineering, which is a subsidiary of Temasek, which has ties to Singapore, and those Singaporean officials have ties to Chinese Communist Party officials. So that is the big concern there, how TransCore's data that it collects on these drivers could end up in the wrong hands with those CCP officials, right? Now, as you look further into this, you understand that this bid process is also shrouded in a lot of secrecy. Because again, we have a protest bid going by Conduit, and that is because TransCore's final bid, valued at $1.7 billion that we talked about, was selected even though Conduit could offer the same service for about $1.5 billion. So it came in lower, but yet they went with it. And also, the New Jersey Vindicator reports that TransCore's initial bid was even higher, over $2 billion. But the New Jersey Turnpike Authority met behind closed doors with the TransCore people, and then they came up with a $500 billion less bid, which was the final bid that they ultimately selected, right? Now, TransCore is no small company. It handles about 12% of all of the tolling in North America, and that's according to DI Market. So this company is not just some random company that came on the scene and got the bid for the construction of the tolling facilities in the New Jersey Turnpike. No, it is a very widespread company. I mean, it's up there with Siemens and a couple of these other companies. So it is very, very big. But this company has pushed back. TransCore says, no, these allegations are not the case, citing the fact that all of its products are made in the United States, and not only that, but that it's the only tolling services company that has all of its products made in the USA. And also, it has national security agreements with the Department of Justice and with the Department of the Treasury. We've reached out to both those agencies. The Department of Justice declined to comment, citing these confidentiality requirements, and the Treasury Department hasn't gotten back to us yet, but the Treasury Department oversees CFIUS, which is an agency that looks into foreign investment in American projects. So TransCore CEO Whit Hall is saying that the company checks out among all these government agencies with their security agreements, so it's pushing back on those claims. We'll have to let more details emerge as the story develops. And we'll let you know if the Treasury Department gets back to us.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth is going to Panama this week. It comes after a deal to sell ports on the Panama Canal to U.S. firm BlackRock has not gone through. The Hong Kong-based company CK Hutchison agreed to sell its stake in the canal, but was relentlessly pressured by the Chinese Communist regime to back off the deal. President Trump sees control of the canal as a matter of national security. His views are that the Chinese Communist Party holds too much influence over it, and Panama has violated its neutrality treaty. Well, Hegseth is in Panama. He plans to attend a security conference and meet Panama's president. The U.S. also plans to continue ongoing joint military exercises with Panama this week. Hegseth and Panama's president in February agreed to expand military cooperation and safeguard the canal. Nearly 100 bomb threats made against a U.S.-based classical Chinese dance group. Who is behind the extensive attacking campaign? A police investigation in Taiwan now reveals a possible link with China's tech giant Huawei. Here's a closer look.
New York-based Shen Performing Arts is now touring Taiwan. However, several government agencies and organizations in Taiwan received a series of threatening emails. Those stated, quote, "There would be shootings or bombings if Shen performances are not canceled." As of April 4th, a total of 13 such threats have been reported. Taiwan's Criminal Police Bureau has formed an cross-agency task force to investigate. They traced the source of the emails to the vicinity of a Huawei research institute in China's northwestern Xi'An city. According to the police in Taiwan, the emails could have been sent by people related to the Chinese tech giant Huawei. They didn't rule out the possibility that they were sent from the Chinese Communist Party's cyber army based in that area. Shen is dedicated to the revival of China's 5,000 years of traditional culture. The performance depicts the ongoing persecution of spiritual group Falun Gong in mainland China that Beijing has been trying to cover up. The threatening emails in Taiwan are among about 100 targeting the company since last year when it toured the United States and Europe.
When we got leaked documents from China, from the Ministry of State Security and Ministry of Public Security, and they spoke of a well-coordinated and extensive effort to completely destroy Shen and the broader Falun Gong community in the United States. A sort of endgame scenario. We've seen large-scale attacks in a campaign by the New York Times with no less than 10 articles attacking Shen. And we've seen horrifying bomb threats, death threats, rape threats.
On March 30th, Shen received a bomb threat hours before its last performance in Claremont, California. The venue was immediately evacuated. A similar evacuation took place at the John F. Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. on February 20th. The bomb threat, just as those made to other theaters, turned out to be fake. In response to a question from NTD regarding the bomb threat at the Kennedy Center, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt condemned such actions.
Don't disrupt it. This administration will take that very seriously and hold you accountable. We obviously condemn any violence or threats of violence against American institutions.
The State Department also denounced Beijing's intimidation campaign against Shen. In a recent statement to the Epoch Times, the department says its annual International Religious Freedom Report documents incidents of interference against Falun Gong practitioners and Shen performing arts in many countries.
Shen Performing Arts took theatergoers in New York City on a journey through ancient China with NTD as a media sponsor. Audience members shared their reflections after watching the show. Take a look.
Shen Performing Arts took the stage in front of a full house on both April 4th and the 5th at the David H. Koch Theater at Lincoln Center in New York City. In the audience was a representative of New York State Senator Stephen Chan, who honored the performers with a proclamation.
I really like they put some of the Asian stories inside all the dance moves, so that actually people can learn about the Chinese stories as well. Of course, the other dances are incredible.
I'm mesmerized by everything, the technique of the dancers, all of the storytelling, their unique expression and artistry, the costume, the interaction with technology. This is a wonderful, wonderful show. I think it's a spiritual energy that transpires from the dancers, because it's not just a dynamic, it's not just a movement, it comes from inside and it spreads through the audience.
It was breathtaking. I mean, the abilities of the dancers, and I mean, that must be so much hard work. And yeah, they were divine beings up there. They really were.
Shen aims to revive 5,000 years of divinely inspired traditional Chinese culture and values from a time before communism. Through the performance, Shen also reveals the brutal persecution of spirituality by the Chinese Communist Party. The company cannot perform in China as a result.
Someday you will return to China and you'll be able to have these types of dances and this type of greater level of freedom in China where people can follow their dreams and actually be politically free, which would be a wonderful thing.
They're magnificent, and keep up the good work, and I hope the tradition continues. And it's hard to believe that this was suppressed in China, because to suppress something like this is really a crime.
The music was amazing, the dances were amazing, but what even impressed me even more was the message that they were giving, you know? The whole good versus evil, which is so important, especially in this atmosphere that we have in the world all over today.
Shen will be performing at the David H. Koch Theater at Lincoln Center in New York City until April 13th. NTD News, New York.
Coming up, President Trump threatening to impose an additional 50% tariff on China. This after the regime issued retaliatory duties on the United States last week, Sam Wong reports. And how might these tariffs reshape global dynamics when it comes to both America's allies and adversaries? A national security analyst joins us to discuss after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump today vowing to impose more tariffs on China as soon as Wednesday. This comes after the Chinese Communist Party issued a 34% retaliatory duty on the United States last week. What's driving the back and forth? NTD's Sam Wong has the details.
With China, as you know, against my statement, they put a 34% tariff on above what their ridiculous tariffs were already. Hundreds of billions of dollars a year they'd make on us on trade, and it shouldn't be that way.
President Trump on Monday vowing to impose an additional 50% tariffs on Chinese imports. That's if Beijing does not withdraw its retaliatory duties on American goods by Tuesday. Additionally, Trump wrote on Truth Social, quote, "All talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated." With that, he added that negotiations between the U.S. and other countries will begin immediately.
When you look at the trade deficit that we have with certain countries, way over $1 billion per country. But with China, it's $1 trillion. And unless we solve that problem, I'm not going to make a deal.
According to the White House, the upcharge would come on top of the more than 50% tariffs already put in place. That means the total U.S. duties on Chinese imports could soar past 100% in the coming days. President Trump unveiled his wide-ranging tariffs last week on what he called Liberation Day.
This will be indeed the golden age of America. It's coming back. We're going to come back very strongly.
Officials said the duties are partially aimed at reducing U.S. trade deficit, bringing back manufacturing, and tackling unfair trade practices by the Chinese Communist Party. These are long-time issues going back even before Congress issued permanent normal trade relations status for China. Critics say the move allowed American companies to export manufacturing abroad and deplete U.S. production, a concern echoed by both Republicans and Democrats for decades.
China trade supports 170,000 jobs in the United States, 170,000 jobs, whereas our imports from China support 10 million jobs at least. Fact is that U.S.-China trade is a job loser.
Worth noting, foreign-made pharmaceuticals are exempt from reciprocal tariffs, but President Trump says he plans to impose levies on medications with the goal of bringing production back to the United States. China currently dominates the sector. Aside from taxing China directly, the White House also imposed a secondary 25% tariff on countries that buy crude oil from Venezuela. China is currently the world's largest buyer of Venezuelan oil. Meanwhile, Trump also imposed duties on Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, and Mexico, all of which are countries used by China to circumvent U.S. tariffs. Sam Wong, NTD News, Washington, D.C.
Joining us now to discuss the new U.S. tariffs and how they will reshape global dynamics is retired U.S. Navy captain and national security analyst Armin Kurdian. Armin, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. Now, stock markets had their biggest intraday swings today amid a fresh round of escalating rhetoric between the U.S. and China. At least 50 countries are already reaching out to the White House to negotiate. President Trump threatening China with another 50% tariff starting this Wednesday if Beijing doesn't pull its 34% retaliatory ones. Will these global tariffs reshape global dynamics going forward?
Good afternoon, Tiffany. Yeah, who needs Disneyland roller coasters when you have the stock market, as we've seen in the last few days? So let's start with China. I think China is probably the easiest example where you have currency manipulation, unfair trade. I mean, China exports well over $500 billion of goods to the United States. Their economy is about $20 trillion, which means that trade with the United States is about 2.5%, perhaps even 3% of their total gross domestic product. So for China, tariffs and the trade imbalance and the practices they've had, including the theft of intellectual property from a lot of our defense manufacturers, is a real, serious, and genuine issue. And that does need to be addressed. And I think Trump is doing the right thing by being tough with China. Now, as for the rest of the world, it's a very complex issue because in a lot of ways, every nation kind of stands on its own. There are some countries that have been not good trade partners, some that have been good, some that have very high tariffs, but a lot of them tend to be low-income nations that derive most of their income from tariffs and not necessarily income taxes like we do in the United States. What is going to happen over the next few weeks? I think it's going to depend on how many countries come to the table and who decides to negotiate the best deal more quickly. But as we've seen, simply reducing tariffs to zero is not necessarily a way for countries to get back onto Trump's good side, so to speak. A lot of it is really going to depend on the fact of all these other things, whether it's a value-added tax, whether there's other restrictions on requirements and performance that a lot of these countries are going to impose. So a lot of moving parts.
Speaking of those moving parts, we had Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House today saying Israel will eliminate tariffs on the U.S. Now, Taiwan's president saying his country won't retaliate and is seeking to get bilateral zero tariffs. Japan's prime minister seeks to visit the U.S. to reach a tariff deal as well. What do you make of these moves by Israel, Taiwan, and Japan?
Well, these nations have very strong trade relationships with the United States, especially Taiwan and Japan, with whom our national security is inextricably intertwined. We get so many of our semiconductors from Taiwan, so many of our vehicles from Japan. You've seen how the UAW has been a big fan of these tariffs, which is probably going to be great for the short term. But if they start losing their markets for their vehicles overseas and they start seeing some of their jobs go away, they might possibly change their minds. But on the flip side of that, because of a number of factors such as the cost of doing business in the United States, over-regulation, and tariff protectionism overseas, Detroit doesn't really make regular cars and autos anymore. They're making their bread and butter on larger vehicles, minivans, SUVs, trucks, and other types of vehicles. The mid-size intermediate vehicle, you don't see a lot of those American-made cars anymore. You know, you got Tesla and electric cars going on, not much of anything else. So I think where you'll see some of the greatest impact, if you want to go out and buy a car, I think even if it's locally made, you may see prices actually increase as automakers might increase the prices of their American-made vehicles to perhaps offset the loss of income from vehicles being sold overseas that were going in, previously without any problems. So it is a very, very complex problem. I am hopeful that the administration will come to the table with these other countries all over the world and solve this quickly, because I think even Republicans are giving the administration a short leash on this one.
I want to circle back to your earlier point about China, because looking at China's economy, unemployment rates are at a record high. Foreign investment is fleeing China, given the country's economic woes. Can China withstand imposing tariffs in response if there are attacks on their own people?
Quite possibly. I think there is kind of the unspoken consensus, or maybe even somewhat spoken consensus, that China has been hiding a lot of its issues in terms of how much money it has truly borrowed what its growth rate truly is, what the economic well-being of its populace really is. Once you start moving out of the large cities, China is not a rich country, and they still recognize that. In many ways, China's been playing a very, very long game. They want to overtake the United States as the world's preeminent economic power, but they are also borrowing from the future, much as the United States has been. So it's possible that China may be able to go beyond where one would say would be economically safe for them to do so, perhaps in an effort or a gamble that that gamble will pay off in terms of winning an economic or some sort of geo-economical conflict with the United States. But the consequences of that could be very serious. A lot of people are talking about, well, even if this goes a few months, things will go back to normal once we get these trade negotiations all completed and done. If the United States falls into recession, if China falls into recession, if other countries fall into recessions, regardless of what Trump wants to, there's still a lot of economic links between the world that are happening right now. Trump is trying to free us of some of that, which is a good thing. But at the same time, folks start losing their jobs. You can't just turn the switch on and off just like that. So again, the hope is that this turmoil will end well within 90 days so that the impact to our economy is not, and the world's economy is not long lasting.
Now, in terms of national security here at home, Ambassador Robert Lighthizer, who's now chair of the Center for American Trade at AFPI, said that Trump's Liberation Day tariffs send a strong message, adding, quote, countries will no longer take advantage of the American market with unfair trade practices that have hollowed out our manufacturing base, depressed wages, and threatened our national security. Do you see these tariffs helping American national security? What changes could we see in this area?
Tiffany, the most important thing that you said is U.S. manufacturing, and there is no better example to see what happened back in 2020 during COVID, when we found ourselves at the mercy of the global supply chain. This is something that a lot of economists and even I was ruing about for a period of time long before COVID, and we saw it actually happen. So from a standpoint of being actually able to make physical things, those skill sets, those labor skill sets, especially when it comes to something like shipbuilding, when it comes to refining of metals, when it comes to auto manufacture, let's say electronic and smart displays, those kinds of things where the United States, we simply don't have any manufacturing presence. It is vital that we bring that back to the United States. It is vital that we are able to build this kind of equipment, domestically, for no other reason than if there is another global shock, such as we saw in 2020, that it's not going to impact us as greatly when plants are shuttered around the world, or perhaps there's other kinds of shocks that we lose that ability to make those things or to consume them in the United States because we can't make them here. So this has to be a cooperative effort between labor, between management, and the government to create the best fostered environment to increase U.S. manufacturing with the United States, because our long-term viability as a nation, frankly, depends on it.
Very important point indeed. Armin Kurdian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany.
Coming up, Health and Human Services Secretary RFK Jr. is doing a 3-state Maha tour this week. That's Make America Healthy Again. Jason Blair has the highlights from Kennedy's agenda. And in the NHL, Alex Ovechkin has done the unthinkable, breaking Wayne Gretzky's goal-scoring record. Dave Martin joins us to discuss when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. begins a 3-day Maha tour today, starting in Utah, meeting with Governor Spencer Cox and his administration. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the update.
Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy Jr. starts his 3-day Maha tour with a stop in Utah. HHS says that the Maha tour will include announcements on Maha legislation, visits to health centers, and meetings with tribal leaders, as well as a visit to a pre-K to 11th grade charter school that integrates healthy food and physical exercise into the students' daily lives. Last week, Kennedy told reporters he's working on revising nutrition guidelines for schools.
We are going to come up with a document that is simple, that lets people know with great clarity what kind of foods their children need to eat, what kind of foods they can eat, and what's good for them, what's good nutrition.
On Sunday, Kennedy visited Gaines County, Texas to console the family of an 8-year-old girl who suffered the second known measles-related death in the state. In a post on X, Kennedy said in early March, I deployed a CDC team to bolster local and state capacity for response across multiple Texas regions, supply pharmacies, and Texas-run clinics with needed MMR vaccines and other medicines and medical supplies. Since that time, the growth rates for new cases and hospitalizations have flattened. The most effective way to prevent the spread of measles is the MMR vaccine. I've spoken to Governor Abbott and I've offered HHS's continued support. After stopping in Utah, Kennedy will be traveling to Arizona and New Mexico. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a busy weekend in sports, but let's start in hockey as Alex Ovechkin passed Wayne Gretzky's record yesterday to become the all-time leader in goals. Did you think this was possible a year ago?
I actually thought it was doubtful this time a year ago. I mean, last year, he kind of slowed down his goal scoring. I think he did 30 in 80 games, which is still good. It was below his standards, though. He then got shut out in the playoffs. Plus, he was the same age as Gretzky was when Gretzky retired, 38 years old. As you can see there, I mean, he scores there, though, on the left circle. That's pretty much his spot. It was on a power play. That was another great one by Ovechkin. That's pretty much the same spot that he scored number 894 just a couple days ago. But in any case, I thought if he was going to do this, it was going to take a couple more seasons. But he really started this year on fire. 15 goals in his first 18 games. And this is his 42nd of the season. That's now 4th in the NHL. So, I mean, that he's passing him is one thing. That he's doing it in his prime is another. He could easily go past 900, and who knows how many more years he can possibly play. I mean, hockey is a little bit easier, I guess, since they play on ice to be able to play into your 40s. I mean, Gordie Howe played for a very late age, actually. So we'll have to see with Ovechkin, but congratulations to him passing the record.
Looking at a younger age bracket, shifting gears now to women's college basketball, UCONN defeated South Carolina yesterday 82-59 to win the national title. Were you surprised by that margin?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, they were 6-point favorites going out. I was even surprised they were that much. I mean, South Carolina is the defending champion. They've won 2 of the last 3 national titles. They were the 1 seed. UConn was a 2 seed. It was actually surprising to me. I would think they probably did it because, they won 11 national titles under Gino Auriemma in the 3 decades he's been there plus. But it had been 9 years since they won a title, almost like a drought for them. But anyway, yesterday's game was really almost out of reach by the end of the third. They were up 20 points, and South Carolina was having a lot of trouble scoring. And I was wondering, how UConn even was a 2 seed. They blew out South Carolina by 30 points earlier this year at South Carolina. That snapped their 71-game home winning streak. In any case, congratulations to UConn, national title number 12, all in the last 30 years. So they have a 9-year drought there, but now the dynasty continues.
Moving to baseball news, the Toronto Blue Jays have reportedly signed first baseman Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to a $500 million contract extension. Now, where does this rank in terms of most dollars?
Right now, it's our third highest in baseball history. Now, if he had a deal like this 18 months ago, this would have been number 1. But, just over a year ago, Shohei Ohtani signed that $700 million deal, really reset the market. Then this past offseason, Juan Soto won up that $765. It used to be the best players were in that $300 million to $400 million range, like Bryce Harper, Mookie Betts, Francisco Lindor, Aaron Judge. All those guys recently signed deals in that window there. But one difference here, Guerrero's age. He just turned 26 years old. Most of these guys signed those contracts a few years older than that. Certainly your late 20s is still going to be your prime years in baseball. Now, Guerrero, of course, is not a big of a household name as those other guys. He's a 4-time All-Star. He finished runner-up in the MVP voting a couple of years ago. So he's definitely got a bright future and definitely got a rich one.
Looking at sports tonight, we have the men's championship game, Florida versus Houston. Now, I know you picked Florida to win it all a few weeks ago. Are you sticking with them?
I am sticking with the Gators. I don't even think we've seen them at their best in this tournament. I thought they were playing their best leading up to the tournament. They've had some close wins. They definitely have the best player in the tournament. Walter Clayton Jr. has kind of rescued them in their last couple of games here against Texas Tech. And then against Saturday against Auburn, first player to have 30-point games in the Elite Eight and Final Four since Larry Bird 4 decades ago. always scores in crunch time too. Now he's gonna have his hands full tonight with Houston, surely. Now Houston plays a much different game. I don't know how they did that comeback Saturday night against Duke. That was pretty incredible. I was regretting picking them to pull the upset, but somehow they did at the end. Their full court press is very difficult to advance the ball past. They rebound well. Now Florida, fortunately, they rebound well, they score well. Houston, though, likes to slow down the game, so I think the pace of tonight's game is going to be very pivotal. Houston allows the fewest points in the country, 58 points a game. Florida scores the third most. So you're definitely going to have, it's definitely going to be a clash of styles here tonight. So I think whoever has the pace is high is going to go to Florida. Pace is low, it's going to go to Houston. But I think Florida is going to win.
Well, sounds like a lot of excitement either way. Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.